The stories allowed us to build larger and larger communities of collaboration. So in a sense, our history is not a history of divide. Our history is a history of coming together and greater numbers.
Welcome to Point of Relation with Thomas Hübl, a podcast that illuminates the path to collective healing at the intersection of science and mysticism. This is the Point of Relation. The following interview was recorded during a previous Collective Trauma Summit, an online gathering convened annually by Thomas Hübl. Visit collectivetraumasummit.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the Collective Trauma Summit. My name is Thomas Hübl. I'm the convener of the summit. And I'm honored, really honored. I wanted this for a long time, to be talking to John A. Powell, director of the Othering and Belonging Institute, professor of law, African American and ethnic studies at the University of California at Berkeley. So John, a warm welcome. I'm so happy to be sitting here with you after many years of trying to get together somehow, and our schedules didn't allow it sometimes, but now we're here. So thank you so much for joining us.
I'd like to be in your presence.
I don't know, many years ago, I heard about your work on othering and bridging and divides and how we work on some of the social fragmentations. I was always interested in hearing more. And also when I sit here with you, I feel it's like the transmission of that. And I'm very curious to learn about how you walked your path to more and more embody this kind of work that you're doing. And so maybe you can share with us a little bit the beginning, like what brought you to do this work or to be interested in it. Maybe this was always clear to you as a kind of a deep vision that drives your life, or stuff happened in your life that brought you onto this path. Maybe you can share a bit with us.
Thank you. Well, I shared a story with folks in the past about my meeting with Joanna Macy. I'll start there. When I met, she's recently passed, and she greatly influenced me in my thinking and my feeling, my being in the world. So I felt honored to have encountered her as a friend. But when we first met, she said, "So John, what is your story?" And I said, "Well, Joanna, there are many stories, and they're not true, but they're not false either. Of course, pick one." I feel like as we look back at our lives, we tell stories, and you write about stories, and they're never quite complete, and I remember them. And, I'd like to think when I was 5 years old in Detroit playing marbles, I was thinking about belonging, but I knew I was just thinking about those marbles. So I have a narrative. I don't totally believe it myself. I think it's a narrative constructed I'm in my 70s. So as I sort of look back in my life, I sort of use your term, I add some coherency to when there maybe was none. But as I think about my life, I think my family, my parents were very religious. They both were passed. My father's a Christian minister, a large family. I'm 6 of 9 children, but the family was much larger than that. We were a way station from the South. My family lived in the South. They moved to Detroit, and then waves and waves of people would come through. So there were oftentimes 20 or 30 people in the house. In a small house, we never had much in the material sense. There's profound love in the family and deep, deep connection. It's hard to even describe how wonderful it was. And I didn't appreciate it until I left. I didn't appreciate it fully until I went away to college and started experiencing other ways of being in relationship with families. But I had a break in my family when I was 11. I read about this in my book, The Power of Bridging. Every Sunday in church, when church service would end, the minister was speaking. Sometimes my dad, sometimes other ministers would say, "Does anyone have any questions?" And I was born in that church, so I didn't know anything else. So at probably, 9, I started reading about the world. I started reading about Chinese. I realized that there were a lot of Chinese, and most of them were not Christians. And the church doctrine was, unless you were baptized, not just in the Christian faith, but in that church, you're going to hell.
Mm.
So I mean, a lot of people going to hell, right? So minister, Brother Manuel, asked the question, does anyone have any questions? And I stood up. And it's only in retrospect that I realized, no, in my entire 11 years, no one had ever stood up. And I was the first person, because it was an audible gasp. Like, and Brother Manuel said, that's okay, that's okay. Brother Powell, what is your question? And I said, what's going to happen to the Chinese? And he started going around the Bible, looking at different scriptures, but they never really answered the question. And after being flustered somewhat by this 11-year-old, was completely sincere, he said, don't worry about it. I never went back to the church after that. And it created this tremendous break in my family. Because the other part of the church doctrine was that if someone fell away, you were not to have fellowship with them. So in a sense that my dad in particular stopped talking to me for almost 5 years. And that was very painful. And it was painful not just in terms of my dad, which was painful, and the church, which was also painful. It also meant break from God as I knew God, because I was a believer. And it meant in my own way of thinking that I too now was going to hell. But I never went back. And so part of the story I tell is that at that point, when I was 11, I started searching for something else. That was a break. And I didn't have my family. I didn't have a place I didn't belong. I didn't have my people. My mom, though, was not satisfied having her baby son and her beloved husband having this break between them. So she went to work. She started trying to bridge our relationship, and she was a master.
Mm.
Of course, I didn't have those words, but that's what she was doing, and she eventually did it.
Oh, wow. So you had your first bridging training very early with a master at home. Right. Like one follow-up a question, and then we dive deeper into the bridging and the othering of your work. Like when you look back, like as if your life is a river and you're looking back at the water flow so what do you feel this experience as an 11-year-old, um, how did that influence or inform you becoming you?
Well, 11 was very significant for me. I call her grandmother, but I think she's my great grandmother, who I used to spend the summers with in the South. She died. And that also shattered my world. I mean, it's like we have these large families tend to be somewhat matriarchal, even though they claim to be patriarchal. The women really are in control. And so in a sense, I didn't know, in a sense, loneliness or um, sort of like if you're in a cocoon, you don't realize how big the world is, how scary it is. It's just a really pretty warm, comfortable place. And so that all changed at 11. And I don't talk about this story much, but the other part of the story is that I'm 11 years old. I've broken from my immediate family. My grandmother's died. And I remember being on our back porch in Detroit and crying, looking out at the stars and just saying, I don't want to be here anymore.
Mm.
It's just too painful.
Yeah.
And what came back to me, and I remember thinking in these terms, thinking, this is not my place. I want to go home. I want to go back home. And what came to me at that moment, and I don't know if it was auditory or how, it's hard to describe the medium, but it was clear. And the message was, you can go home when you finish your work. And that's when I started my work.
Wow. Powerful.
I think I'm about to go home soon. No, not too soon, but maybe soon.
Wow, it's also touching. It's like I can feel very strongly with you when you share. And what also reached me is when you speak about the love that you experienced in your family. Like this, you really transmit like a deep connection or love that you got also in your early formative years that kind of is palpable when you speak about it. It's beautiful.
I was going to say, so I'm sure your listeners know you, and I know you a little bit through your writing, but I'd love to know how you came to this work as well.
When I was 26, I had a very strong calling to go for years onto. I didn't know it's going to be for years, but I went onto a meditation retreat, and I was like I left my medical studies and I went to this retreat, and it was at the end 4 years. And in this time, I had like a very deep time of inner studying. There was I don't know, it's the best way I can describe it. I learned a lot, but in a different way, even by sometimes unlearning some of the stuff that I learned before, and 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 I think that deeply opens me to this kind of collective perception, like the being more connected to the collective systems. And then when I started the work that I do today, like 25 years ago, like the the collective, I don't know, the collective wounds of different cultural spaces opened up very easily in the groups that I was running. And it started to teach me about collective trauma. That's how 25 years ago, because it happened in the groups again and again, just with different people, that that's what invited me into the work. And then as I learned to read these patterns and as I learned to listen to this deeper, it taught me a lot about this kind of dimension of collective trauma. And then I started to research it and write about it and like all kinds of things. But I think that these two things were very important for me, and also a little bit I had that's why I resonate most probably with you, because I feel that the deep, as a child I had a deep connection to the divine, but I didn't have such a connection to the local church where I grew up. And so I carry this discrepancy a bit in myself, that I didn't feel the belonging in the spiritual environment, that I this was the only thing I knew. And but I had a different sense inside of myself. So these are three components, I think, that all together brought me to that path. Hmm. Yeah, thank you for asking. And so, given that you're doing that work that you came to do here, maybe you can share a little bit about your understanding of bridging, belonging, and also like what's the function of othering? Like where does this arise, and what do you feel are root causes? Why it seems often so difficult to relate to that, and why are we struggling so much with social divides,
Yeah.
interpersonal divides, whatever? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think, some people think othering is we're wired to other, that it's part of our evolutionary history. It's the natural expression of human beings. I think that's actually wrong, or not just wrong on multiple levels. It makes sense that people would think that. Um, and some people take it back to tribes, which is actually a misnomer, because when we talk about hunter gatherers, which is usually what they're talking about, um, 15, 20, 100,000 years ago, uh, they basically lived in small bands. It's a few exceptions, but basically lived in small bands, anywhere from 50 to 200 people. And those are the people you spend your whole life with. Uh, and um, you trusted them and you needed them and you belonged to them to survive. It wasn't a metaphor or an allegory. It was just reality. And so about 70,000 years ago, something happened. They called it a cognitive break. And when that cognitive break happened, cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens, not the other 8 or 9 human species, learned to tell stories and to imagine. Apparently, before that, we couldn't do either. And learning to imagine and tell stories created what some historians says is a break from, history broke from biology. In other words, they were on an evolutionary path, and now we could tell stories that took us a very different direction. And instead of our community being 50 or 100, we start developing stories that allow our communities to grow to thousands and millions. When we talk about a nation, United States, 330 million people, that's not a tribe. There's never been a tribe that size. We talk about 40 million Black people in the United States. That's not a tribe. We talk, there's something else holding those people together. It's not their day-to-day contact that they have with each other. It's not the physical reality. It's an imagined story. And in that imagined story, we create new identities that allow us to cooperate. And the other thing is that evolution takes place over a long period of time very slowly. So evolutionarily, we are almost exactly as we were 30,000 years ago. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have cars. We didn't have religion. We didn't have language. The alphabet. We didn't have mathematics. We didn't have reading. So when we look at people who lived 30,000 years ago, they look very different from us. But evolutionary, they're not. What's different is we live in a different story. That's the story that we create, and stories can happen very fast. So and one of the big stories is that the thing that has allowed Homo sapiens, not humans, Homo sapiens, to thrive and do all the incredible things we do, is the stories allowed us to build larger and larger communities of collaboration. So in a sense, our history is not a history of divide. Our history is a history of coming together and greater numbers. First in the thousands, now in the millions, then in the billions. There are 3.5 billion people on the planet who today will call themselves Christians. Many of them will never see each other. They don't speak the same language. They don't speak the same food, eat the same food. They don't belong to the same country. What's holding them together? Why do they see themselves as a community? Because they share something. And what he would say is they share a story, being a disciple of Jesus. That wasn't true. And so can we tell a different story still? Can we tell a story not just encompassing 2.5 billion people, or the 2 billion people call themselves, it's a Muslim? Can we tell a story that encompasses the 8 billion people who inhabit the planet and the planet itself? And there's no impediment to that. So we have the capacity to actually not only tell a greater and greater story, but also to be in greater and greater, I think you would say, attunement ourselves. And to think that's from my perspective, our spiritual journey. You asked them about othering. There are also stories about the other, full of fear and full of dehumanization. So we have two kinds of stories going at the same time. We have what I call breaking stories. That is, that the other is a threat, and bridging stories. And the breaking stories that they're very deep as well. Some of the religious stories are breaking stories. So religions created space where thousands of millions of people could come together. But it also created a categorical other. Not a Christian, you're a sinner. If you're not a Muslim, you're an infidel. If you're not so it's like we create these stories and we draw these sharp lines. And part of it, and my read is that one reason othering is so powerful is that it's used in service of belonging. We use othering to create a sense. It's like if you want to be in my group, you have to exclude that other group. And so since belonging is, I think, foundational, much more foundational than othering. I'm willing to other in order to belong. So we've told stories, we've created systems, we've created countries, we've created clubs where people could belong. But in doing so, we also create the other.
Mm-hmm. When you take the religious scriptures, or when you take just the Bible, and you look at the Old Testament, like when you say, okay, there are a lot of stories of belonging to a tribe, as you said, or to a community, or to a population, or othering another population, as you said. What do you feel is or what did your work teach you is the root cause that even in the like deepest scriptures that are responsible for bringing billions of people together, there we wove, or they're interwoven stories of separation or othering. What do you think is the root cause of that?
Well, I think it's very subtle. I think, and of course, the Old Testament and the New Testament are quite different, right? Because Old Testament, God talks about being a jealous God and is a vengeful God. Jesus doesn't talk that way. He talks about love, and in fact, Jesus says we're all children of God. There's no other. And saying that 2,000 years ago, when the world was in its own kind of turmoil, is an amazing thing to say. But the reach of it is we haven't lived it, so we forget how radical Jesus' love was. But part of it, I think, is just experience, right? So we started off in these small bands, and then so we're constructing something, and then there's always those who will take advantage. But at a deeper level, I think the way, especially in the West, but not just in the West, the way consciousness has developed in terms of duality and in terms of separation. And I think the separation is the healing that we're actually trying to solve. And I talk about different levels of separation. So if you think of, I have a t-shirt, Thomas, that I think you would appreciate. And the t-shirt says, I hug, therefore I am. And of course, I'm playing off Descartes, who's considered the father of modern Western philosophy and mathematics. So he's saying, I think, therefore I am. He's showing a separation between the body, emotions on one hand, and the mind on the other. And early Western philosophy is a difficult relationship with the body and emotions. Don't trust them. Instead, we're supposed to think our way through this, reason our way through this. That's a split. We've split within ourselves, and that's reflected in the world. We split with nature. I think it's Genesis 1:23, I believe, where it says God gave man dominion over the earth and all living things. What a terrible idea.
Right. Right. You will see it 2,000 years later. What a terrible idea.
We control, that we dominate the earth and all living things. Not that we're in relationship, not that they're part of who we are, not that we are integrated with the whole universe. Instead, we are dominion over it. And so part of what happens is when we separate from things and we don't understand them, we also become afraid of them. And we manage that fear by othering and by dominating. And so that's peppered throughout much of certainly Western history, but all history. And so in the sense of consciousness, we use consciousness to split ourselves off. And the spiritual traditions have all been trying to heal those splits. But also we have, sort of the spiritual tradition over here and the political tradition over here. So in a sense, it's sort of fascinating because we keep reaching for something that's not there. I remind people that in the United States, our Declaration of Independence, which was authored by a number of people, but particularly Thomas Jefferson, it starts off with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, created equal." The irony of that is Jefferson had 600 people enslaved. And so is he just a hypocrite? And yet he's saying it's self-evident that we're all created equally. So we have this contradiction, right? That here in the United States, we're still fighting over. It's hard to sort of get to the root of it because it's who we are in some respects, but it's also, we're at the same time deeply spiritual beings trying to become conscious of our connection. The last thing I'll say is that we have this thing saying, circle of human concern, where no one's outside the circle, where no one is outside the circle of human concern. And someone said to me, well, that's great, but what about the earth? Why didn't you include the earth? And I think they're exactly right. But with this addition, humus comes from the word humus, which means of the earth. So when we are deeply in relationship with the earth. We're not separate from the earth. We don't live that. We don't practice it. We forget it. And then in forgetting it, we other. Because once we separate from something, once we don't understand something, once we become fearful of something, it becomes the other that has to be dominated and controlled. You mentioned you came back from the mountains, I believe. It's interesting. We like parks. But we don't like the woods. So if you think of Graham's fairy tales, Little Red Riding Hood, terrible things happen in the woods, right? And the difference to me is that parks are nature that's completely domesticated. Up at here is stay in place. And the grass is not allowed here. When you go in the woods, and humans no longer control it, and we're afraid. It's dark. It's mysterious. It's dangerous. There's a big bad wolf lurking behind every tree.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What you just said about the domestication of, like, it's not anymore its own natural habitat that we are part of. And that's right. It's very beautiful what you said about, because I deeply believe that that's true, that in that our bodies are the planet, but the separation of our sensing of our bodies and our emotions, like these internal splits, kind of produce the illusion as if we were separate. And then we start acting from that place as the thinking, therefore I am. So that separation became like a whole school of thought that influenced so many societies. But in fact, it's actually, like, in my language, I would say, but in the trauma language, I would say it's like it's exactly the trauma symptom of splitting off or creating two, because in the traumatic moment, you always create two. Because the overwhelm that's being shut down to survive, or it's a necessity, is like creating two. And we are struggling all the time with this two-ness, that either this two-ness, it's like all the time about this separation.
Oh, no, I think that's right. And I think, preparing for our conversation today and reading some of your work, I also thought that one of the reasons trauma is hard to address, especially in Western medicine, is because the medicine is already divided, right? And the trauma is actually something that not only happens at the psychological, emotional level, it also happens at the physical level. Oh, I went for a walk. A friend of mine that was a psychiatrist, and he was talking about what do you call, I guess, cold water therapy. Sometimes when people are experiencing deep trauma and anxiety, they put them in cold water. He said it's hard to shiver and be anxious at the same time, right? In a sense, what he's doing is you're reconnecting the body with with the mind. And so when you have a problem, it's like, is it a psychological problem? Is it an emotional problem? Is it a physical problem? Is it a community problem? It's all of it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And because we will only deal with one piece of it, it doesn't work. Take this, right? And so part of it is that the split is already there, and we're just this more extreme version of it. But it seems to me that trauma is just an extreme example split, right? The world is, as you said, we're shutting down. We're shutting down at multiple levels, not just the psychological level, but also shutting down at the physical level.
Exactly. And that's, I think, where a lot of our intelligence we get disconnected from a lot of intelligence that is natural sensing, that is natural instincts, that is natural also community resonance. As you said, I love this. That's why I wrote a book about collective trauma, because I thought, yeah, we are often talking about that individual piece, like what happens to a person or to a few people, but what happens to the community. And I'm curious, because you have a lot of experience also on that level. Like, so what in your experience, so what works in terms of creating bridges, or bridging, or maybe you can share a little bit about what bridging really means for you, and then what do we struggle with, and why, in your understanding, why is it sometimes so hard to integrate a conflict, or to bridge that divide? What are the inhibiting factors, and what are the enabling factors?
Great question. So if you think about it, it's interesting, and so there's a subtlety to it. There's bridging at different levels. There's, you should think of transactional bridging. I'll give you something, you give me something. We're just cutting a deal. But that's not really what I'm talking about mainly in the book. But even at a deeper level, let's say, so you bridge between two people or two communities. It's there's a contradiction and subtlety I want to tease out a little bit. At its deepest level, bridging is false, because bridging presupposes separation.
Yeah.
Right? So in a sense, bridging only happens because we assume and we live as if we're separate.
Exactly.
If we stop living as if we're separate, there's no bridging.
That's right.
But since we do live as we're separate, we not only live as we're separate, we live as if we are being threatened by each other. So that makes it hard. Well, I don't want to listen to you. You're the enemy. You're trying to, and I have this thing where I talk about when you have a very fractured society, and people are very afraid, and you talk to people. Who are you talking to? And what I say is, you're talking to the lizard, to the amygdala. You're talking to part of the brain that's most associated with fear. And that brain, the lizard, speaks a different language. And most of us forget how to speak lizard. And we knew at one point, I mean, we have children, and child is afraid, right? There's a monster under the bed. And a parent comes in, they can either speak lizard and say, sweetie, I'm sorry you're afraid. I was afraid. I had a monster under my bed too. Let's hug. Let's, get to know the monster, right? Or you can talk from the prefrontal cortex, the newest member of the brain, and say, it's not logical that there's a monster under your bed. Here, I'll turn on the light. Look under the bed. There's no monster. Now go to bed. Turn off the light and go to sleep. You just invalidated the child. You haven't solved in fact, you've exacerbated. And so how do we talk to the lizard? And the lizard Descartes didn't talk to the lizard. So part of talking to the lizard, what the lizard is most afraid of, is not belonging. It's not existing. So when the Proud Boys are marching in the United States, the right-wing group are the Proud Boys, when they're marching in Charlottesville, they're marching and they're chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." And that harkens back to a German statement. It was clearly anti-Semitic. It was saying the Germans were being threatened by Jews. These people are not really people. They're threatening to take away your life. That was what Hitler used, and the Proud Boys are using the same thing. But there's also a message in there. And the message is, we are afraid that a future is unfolding where we won't belong. And that's just the terror of that is just beyond belief. And that's one reason that oftentimes authoritarian leaders invite people to go back to the past, because the future looks too scary. So we're going to go back. And when they describe that past to you, it's a past where the other doesn't exist. So for Putin, it's like, but there's just Russians. There's nobody else. There's no Ukrainians. But just, remember Captain the Grave? They were just Russians. Of course, that has never existed. My point is that they're using the fear of not belonging to exacerbate othering. It's saying those people, you can't belong in the midst of those people. You can't be safe. You can't eat your food and worship your God or have your spiritual practice. Those people are trying to threaten that. And fear is, by some accounts, the oldest emotion. So if someone's playing on fear, they're stirring up a lot of people. And people are already afraid because there's a fear, there's an anxiety that comes from being alive and separate. Right? So there's a fear, just it's like background noise. And then we're watching the world change, and someone comes along and give this fear coherence. Do you know why you're afraid, Thomas? You know why you're feeling of disquiet? You know why you're worried about your neighborhood? It's because of those people. And so if we want to bridge, we have to connect. And I have this image of the mind and mind connecting and the heart and heart connecting. And we spend a lot of time in the mind, cognitively connecting. What do you think? We spend less time in terms of how do you feel. And so bridging is about really listening with the heart. It's really, again, I think using part of your language, it's embodied listening. It's listening to it's not just when we teach at Berkeley. We have great students at Berkeley, but we teach them to hang out in the mind. And so when someone says something, you're looking for the error of what they said. You're looking for something off in their logic. You're looking to just almost get them, right? That doesn't create bridging. So bridging is about the heart of it. There's a South African word called sabawanu, which is interpreted as a Zulu word, and it's has many interpretations. One of them is, I see you. Another is, the divine in me sees the divine in you. I just see you. Not that I'm you, or not that I really understand you, but I'm open to you. I'm willing to really listen. What makes it hard? Am I willing to listen to someone that I decided is trying to destroy me? And there's a phrase, to paraphrase Bob Marley, who's a Jamaican singer, passed some time ago. He used to say, every person thinks his burden is the heaviest. So I know the story of my suffering. I don't know the story of yours. So bridging means I'm willing to listen to, with the heart, the whole body, the story of your suffering. And again, once I decide you're the enemy, I'm probably not willing to listen, which makes bridging very difficult.
Yeah, I love that. I love also how you share this with the fear and with the lizard. I think that such an essential aspect of bridging divides is that we are embodied enough to bring regulation into the dysregulation of that part of our collective brain. I think the more we are grounded in ourselves, which means we need to do our own work to be able to be with somebody that is very scared, but have speak to the part of the nervous system that is scared, and not, as you described so beautifully, on top of it. You said it beautifully with the child, because that's exactly the intervention that many parents do. Like when the child comes, I'm scared. Oh, don't be scared. It's not. There's nothing in the house. But that's exactly what makes it stronger. And 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 I love that like, what is our capacity? But then we need to deal with our own fear, because fear is like a viral, I often say, like, fear and stress are viral in stressed nervous systems, but presence is viral. So it's not in presence grounds fear, but I think that's a very beautiful description of what it needs, that more and more of us people can ground in a way the community, and because we need to separate ourselves. I need to separate myself from your fear and stress, but I'm willing to be there with you, and it doesn't matter if I agree to to your opinions or not. And I think that's a powerful quality or skill that you described. Yeah.
No, it is. I think it is quite powerful. Again, what I understand in your work, it seems to me that's what your work really embodies. And the, sort of quote unquote intellectuals are not necessarily good at dealing with fear. We're just a front of the brain. And what I say to people, there's an article in the Atlantic written by a former general who was head of the United States Forces in Afghanistan. And he opens the article, he titles the article, "Be Not Afraid." And it's a beautiful article, actually. I use it a lot with my students, but I reject or challenge the title. And I said, you don't deal with fear by saying, "Be not afraid," right? It's like fear has its place too. You may not want to give it the keys to the car, but it's a reason why we have fear. It's maybe maladapted to what we're trying to do, but it's not bad, right? So one of the chapters in one of the book I wrote was called "Lessons from Suffering," and I feel like there are profound lessons in suffering, but most of the time we push them away. Can't learn from suffering, which means we continue to suffer. And you look at many of the great religions, and they're grounded deeply in suffering. So what is that? What is suffering trying to teach us? What are the lessons? And how do we have a different relationship, individually and collectively, with fear? One of the big fears, of course, is death, and most societies don't deal with death. We have a department store in the United States called Forever 21.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, I think you're speaking to something so profound, because here's another thought that I want to run by you. Or thought, I don't know, it's more than that. It's like, so when trauma happens, I believe, like, the trauma response is obviously an intelligent function. It's like a protective mechanism. And even if it sometimes has severe side effects, but still, that's what it is in the traumatic moment. And in the traumatic moment, in a way, we take a loan from the future, and we have to pay interest rates. Yeah, and if the longer we don't restore it, the more payments come. And 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 I believe that there is, in the traumatic moment, for example, for a child or for anybody that experienced violence or whatever, like, here and now is not good for me. So not here, not now is the better option in the traumatic moment. Like, go out of the body, shut down the pain, the overwhelm, I don't know, just shut down my senses, whatever, that I protect myself from, or shut down the relationship to the one that hurts me. And So, but I think a collective consequence of this is that the salvation or the revelation is always in the future. So we develop the story of salvation, not that the revelation depends on my participation in the revelatory process. That's different. I live a life that is revelatory, then the revelation is always now. Because life speaks to me. Just when I feel you and I'm with you deeply in the conversation, I'm all the time learning from this moment. This is the moment. I'm not thinking about other moments while I'm with you, because this is so deep and precious that I'm not. This reveals life to me through you right now. But often, like we postpone the better world and we rationalize the reasons for it by, oh, now this is happening politically, or this is happening in the world, or there's a war, or because now it's not possible, but then later it's something else. And like this, the revelation is always in the future. And I think it's a collective agreement that we made because of the suffering, that it's like the painkiller that keeps it there. And then we create societies that we are addicted to painkillers, but it's not the pill, it's the painkiller inside that postpones life into this never coming moment. And I think I would love to hear what's your what's your response when I say that, because I think to develop the world that we want to live in, we can only do now through when the pearl of hope comes from the future back into the agency that we have here. And so I'm curious what you think about this when I say all of this.
Oh, I think it's very, very insightful, and I love the idea of sort of borrowing from the future with high rates. So you're getting further and further behind. And also, I think the collective nature of trauma, the collective trauma, is very telling, right? Because one of the things, and I did some work around Katrina and down in New Orleans and work with people down there. And one of the things that was tragic was that people were afraid, and when they turned to the neighbors were also afraid. All of the fear and anxiety and trauma, just if you will, was being amplified in the environment. And the little kids, for years afterwards, whenever it rained, they'd cry. Because but who would help console you? Who would help ground you? Nobody. So collective trauma, I think, has a specific kind of nefarious outcome. So this is one of the things I think. There's a phrase, I think it's by Roberto Unger, who's a Brazilian. He says something like, wherever there's self, there's trembling. Wherever there's other, there's fear. So I think, and he's not a Buddhist. I'll say that much about him. It's brilliant, I think. But what he's saying is that, again, the split has already happened. We're already, even in a sense, we have this low grade trauma that we're living every day, because I'm denying. I'm trying to hold on to what David Lloyd calls insubstantial self. Hold fiction. It's constantly getting away from me. And so we organize societies around that. We organize so this is an aside, but I'm hoping that this is start of a long engagement and friendship with you. This is one of the things I think about, is that we don't spend enough time trying to develop and understand wanting. We want, right? And if we don't get what we want, we're freaked out. But it's like, what is the nature of wanting? What is it about? Why is so much wanting both insatiable and also unfulfilling? I chase something, I get it. It's like, oh, I'm bored in 2 seconds. I'm going on to the next thing. What is that about? And I even think, I think one way I think about love, even romantic love, is that it's a shadow. of divine love. We're trying to be whole again. We're trying to be in relationship. And so we tell these scary tales about it. Uh, but we can't get it because the very nature of how we live our life cuts us off from the very thing we need to live our life. And so, and I think, we can sort of tell a story that more or less works, and then a trauma sort of shocks us. Doesn't work anymore. We don't know who we are anymore. And like you said, that we don't live the future anymore. We're stuck. And how we get unstuck. I mean, I love reading what you're talking about in terms of presence and. But at some point we have to get unstuck. At some point we have to have the energy flowing again. And I think for the most part, we're not very skilled at that.
I think building the collective skill how to liquefy the stagnation back into learning. That's why I love this like that. Of course, we live, innovation is basically resonating with the potential that is coming into form, that is informing us. So it's a way like we learn from the future. If future is not later in time, but future is the new developments that are coming through. But on the other hand, like learning, like the innovation from the so-called past is also learning the learnings that we never had. Because if we liquefy the past and we create more movement, we are inevitably learning something and maturing into a bigger sense of self, like a wider sense of self. And so that learning that is frozen in these different archaeological layers of all kinds of collective traumas in the US, the racism or the Holocaust or the Rwanda, the genocide or whatever it is, colonialism. But how much energy is frozen there. And that's what you said, like we need really to become more skilled. And one question to you is also like, what do you feel can create this literacy, or what did you see works? Because you have so much experience in your work. So what did you see over all these years that you did that work? What can help us to develop this collective literacy to melt our past into like a mutual learning space?
I did some work in South Africa years ago, and helping them in the transition from apartheid to a more open society. And I worked on some systems, including education. And the South Africans wanted me to come back afterwards and I'd be honored for the work I'd done. And it's a long way from the United States to South Africa. So I declined and accepted the offer. Having lived in Africa, I knew that it was more than just a formality. It was a big deal to them. But also it was hard. You'd apply in Johannesburg and where I was living at the time. But the offer was that if I decided to come back, that they would arrange a private dinner with Nelson Mandela.
Oh, wow.
I accept. But I mention that because Nelson Mandela is one of the embodiments of bridging and what we call bridges. When he was on Robben Island in prison, the African who was the head of South Africa was changing the language of instructions to African from English. Many of the Black South Africans were like, not doing it. We're not studying in the oppressor's language. At the same time, Nelson Mandela was in prison, asking his prison guards, who mainly were Afrikaners, to teach them language, to teach them their culture. He was being curious about how they made meaning of life. So much so that they at some point said, you know what? You don't have to do the hard work of other prisoners because we see you as a human being now. He created Bridge. He declined. He said, I will not take any special papers. when he came out of prison, there was a fight, a violent fight with guns and people killing each other, war, if you will. And Nelson Mandela went to the head of South Africa, and he asked if they could consider working on a peace treaty. And the head of South Africa said, "I'm open to it, but you have to convince the general. If I can't get the army behind, I can't do it." So Nelson Mandela met with the general of South African Army in Nelson Mandela's house. And it's a long story, so I won't go through all of it, but the negotiations took place in Afrikaans. Nelson Mandela spoke his language on the negotiations. And when the general left, his entourage was outside, and they said, "Did you tell that monkey off?" Because they called Nelson Mandela a monkey and any other derogatory names. And the general said, "I don't know if I like him. If he can convince anyone of anything, we're going to have a peace treaty." When Nelson Mandela stepped down from being president of South Africa, the general asked if he could speak. And people still hadn't forgiven him for his role, but they said, "You have like 10 to 15 minutes, no more." South Africa. The general gave this really glowing speech about Nelson Mandela in very broken Xhosa, which is Nelson Mandela's native language. And so, and some people feel like things could have been different and should have been different in South Africa. But clearly, they saved thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. They created a container. They recognize each other's sacred symbols, which is how you listen. Leadership, and all of us play some leadership role, can help people get unstuck and give people permission to take chances. Or leadership can exacerbate our stuckness, can exacerbate our fear, can exacerbate our traumas. And so, we see hundreds of examples on both sides. Right now, I think the dominant examples we see is leaders actually exacerbating fear and trauma. So it's hard to believe that we ever can come together, but we can, we have to. And I think the work you're doing, I think the work that others are doing, we need leaders doing it. Many of the leaders today think of themselves as, realists. So they forget about Nelson Mandela. They forget, and I'll stop after this, they forget that at the time that England was the most powerful country militarily and economically in the world, Mahatma Gandhi challenged them through nonviolence and love. It wasn't a countercultural movement of hippies in Berkeley. He was taking on the English Empire. And he didn't get everything he wanted, but he did change the world. So how do we have examples, stories, practices? Now, I'm not Mandela and or Gandhi, but I believe that we can do stuff. We do stuff together.
Yeah, I deeply believe that, and even listening to your transmission, I think just being able to embody some of it and to learn from these great examples, like that of course emerged in a certain context, but the principle is amazing. And it also the courage that is in there, or the vocation, the motivation, the conviction in a way that this is going to work, like holding that vision, that somebody can hold that wider vision for like in such a conflicting time. I think this is amazing. And it shows also that it works. It worked in a certain, of course there were side effects, but they always are. But I love this, and I am deeply with you on that. I think that and to be inspired by those examples, but then to let it emerge out of our core. Where are we examples, like in the bigger or in the local sense for that? Like, how do we listen to what Nelson Mandela listened to in himself in this moment, in this phase? And so we can be inspired by the principle that emerged through this life, and then see, okay, how does this relate to me where I am active, or where you are active, for everybody who's listening now? Yeah.
We're all human beings, right? I mean, we're not perfect. None of us are. We'll make mistakes. And in some ways, I'm more impressed by real human beings doing stuff than I am by, figures that are. And we from my perspective, we're not fixing, as you talk about, we're not fixing the others. We're actually healing ourselves and the world, part of it. And, we saw in COVID how quickly the earth can repair itself if given a chance. We shut down for like a few days, and we have dolphins swimming up, streams, and we have, just the whole earth is just, in a sense, celebrating that humanity is being quiet for a minute.
Right, exactly. Exactly. What a celebration. For today, is there anything that you would love to leave our listeners with? Anything that you feel is important to say still?
Well, two things I guess I would say. One, I think we can tell and do better stories, and I think you invite that. And I think the other is an intentionality. Just you don't have to. When we talk to people about bridging, oftentimes they talk about the most difficult bridge. They'll say, how do you deal with someone who? I mean, literally, I talk to people. How do you deal with someone who's dropping bombs on you? How do you bridge with someone? So you don't, obviously, you go to a bomb shelter. This is not
right.
And so don't pick the most difficult thing, but do something, right? And so I use the analogy that if you've been sitting on your couch for 6 months and you decide maybe you want to run a marathon, don't go out tomorrow and do 13 miles. Just take a walk around the block, maybe 2 blocks. So if we can extend ourselves a little bit and we get better at it, and at the profound level, from my perspective, bridging and the work that you're doing is a spiritual journey. We can't know, quote unquote, if we're going to win. That's the wrong approach altogether. But we can try to be, again, using your words, in attunement with life. We can try to reach toward the sun, not simply for ourselves, but for life itself. I've been fortunate that I feel like from 11 or thereabouts, I was put on a path in service of something bigger than myself, even after being kicked out of my father's religion. That's what we're all here for, to do something not just for ourselves, but for each other and the earth, and for life itself. And there'll be challenges, but also there'll be, I'll end just by saying this. I love many parts of your books, your whole book. You talked about intergenerational trauma. It was passed down from generation to generation. But you said there's also intergenerational wisdom. It's just intergenerational joy. So it's not all hard. It's not all bad. I mean, it's hard something, but we have incredible resources, have incredible possibilities if we open ourselves up to them. And ultimately, we have each other.
Oh, that's so beautiful. John, thank you so much. It was so lovely to spend this time. It passed in a second, and an hour passed. So thank you so much. It was deeply joyful for me, and I felt very connected to you, and I could feel many things that you're sharing. So thank you, and I'm sure it's very rich for everybody who's listening in. So thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And I hope Sunday in California or someplace we'll meet in person as well.
Oh, that would be lovely. I would love that. Anyway, I'm from time to time coming. Before COVID, I was all the time in California because my company is there. So I'm sure I will come back, and I would love to meet in person. That would be lovely. And and hopefully we can let the conversation go on maybe in some other ways. I can reach out when I see a possibility or so. And it's so lovely. There's so much more to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you for your work and for your presence.
And you. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Point of Relation with Thomas Hübl. Stay connected and get updates about new episodes by visiting our website, pointofrelationpodcast.com, and by subscribing to the Thomas Hübl YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share about us with your community on social media. Thank you. We appreciate your support.